Dear fellow truth seekers, thank you and welcome for visiting my channel, MythoReligio. MythoReligio is a video channel based on a book series with the same name about religious comparison studies between the stories in Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism and Buddhism, directly from their sacred books and world mythologies, hence the name MythoReligio. The purpose is to retrace the prehistory of humanity, since I'm not fully satisfied with either the explanations from the point of view of creationist nor evolutionist. There are so many missing links in both explanations. If you feel the same, then you are on the right channel. In this channel, I will also analyze about the prehistory of humanity from the archaeological records, modern scientific point of view, and other alternative theories such as the ancient alien theories and Atlantis or Lemuria legends. After thorough research of circa 30 years, I recognize many similarities between all religious stories and even mythologies, and surprisingly, some of them are in accordance or even beyond modern science that have been proven as correct. Thus, I came to the conclusion that all religions must have come from the same source. And all these religious stories and mythologies, although heavily jumbled up, are actually telling one mega story, the true prehistory of our common ancestors. This mega story is quite different than what we have been told to believe and will truly blow your mind, as it is more fascinating than our imagination. If you have watched the earlier videos in this channel, I believe you can see some of the similarities too. If you haven't and you truly want to do a religious comparative study, I suggest that you do so. The best way to do a comprehensive religious study via this channel is by watching the videos starting from number 1 and continue until this present video and so on. That way you will see a clear pattern. In this channel I will share almost all that I have written in my book series. However, there is one book so far that I cannot share in this channel due to its sensitive, shocking and dark nature, and also might be considered controversial to some, but I believe it sheds more light to the above conclusion. If you want to read this around 500 pages ebook with many full-color illustrations, you are more than welcome to download book number 5 entitled History of the Dark Side, that is available for free in ebook format that can be found in my website www.mythoreligio.com. You only have to give your email address and it will be sent to you directly. And no, I won't share your email address nor send any advertisement. The link is in the description box. If you want to get the physical book, kindly go to amazon.com. Now let's continue with this week's video. From barren lifeless earth to the birth of living cells. Dear fellow truth seekers, for the last few weeks I have shared with you the scientific theories on the origin of life, i.e. the theory of evolution and the Big Bang theory, for our religious versus science comparison study. I did this in order to find answers to the questions that are not answered satisfactorily by religion. Now I would like to continue with the analysis of how life began on Earth. Last week I have shared with you the stages of how atom became living cell according to science. But so far science still could not answer where it took place. Today there are several theories and hypotheses concerning where life began. For example, the primordial soup, the deep sea vent, and the extraterrestrial origins. In these hypothetical locations, scientists theorized how life arises from dead matter. So how does something alive pop out of dead material? This is just as puzzling as trying to explain how the first matter, i.e. primordial atom or hot dense gas, appeared out of nothing and nowhere and took place as the event called the Big Bang, as if by magic, so to speak. The idea of something popping out of nowhere is very hard to grasp. It doesn't matter whether it is an atom, gas, a cell, or an elephant, right? The questions remain. How did that happen? Where did it come from? What caused it? Let's take the primordial soup explanation. According to this theory, billions of years ago, simple cells emerged from quiet, tranquil, warm nutrients in a primitive sea because of a lightning strike. Is this really possible? To go from a barren, lifeless planet to a one filled with living things, we would have to pass through a number of stages and questions to be answered. Question number 1. Could simple living cells live solitude on Earth's atmosphere? Our nature has many balance cycles that enable life to flourish. One example is the cycle of oxygen. Almost all living things need oxygen. They use this oxygen during the process of creating energy in living cells. Here is the simplest illustration. Humans breathe in oxygen, or O2, and breathe out carbon dioxide, or CO2. And the opposite way, plants breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. This is the cycle of oxygen. While oxygen is necessary for life, it also oxidizes whenever combined with metals, nonmetals, and organic matters. This process is called oxidation. For example, iron is oxidized to form iron oxide, i.e. rust. Food decays from a slow oxidation process, i.e. rotting. Now, this perfect cycle creates a problem when we try to reconstruct how the first cells emerged on Earth. Just imagine when the Earth was still a barren, lifeless place, and suddenly living cells emerged from the primitive ocean. These living cells would oxidize and thus destroyed. For example, organic molecules such as amino acids and sugars react with oxygen to form carbon dioxide, CO2, and water. The Earth was still barren. Therefore, there was no oxygen cycle yet, since there were no plants who could transform CO2 back to O2. In this situation, life could not support itself. At present, the Earth is made of heavy elements such as iron and nickel. And furthermore, its atmosphere is made of 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% mixture of gases. Because it is impossible for life to evolve with oxygen, several scientists theorized an early atmosphere without oxygen. Nevertheless, this would also be fatal to an evolutionary origin of life. If there were no oxygen, there would be no protective layer of ozone surrounding the Earth. Ozone is produced by radiation from the sun on the oxygen in the atmosphere, converting the diatomic oxygen, or O2, we breathe to triatomic oxygen, O3, which is ozone. Therefore, if there were no oxygen, there would be no ozone. The deadly destructive ultraviolet light from the sun would pour down on the surface of the Earth directly, destroying those organic molecules required for life, reducing them to simple gases, such as nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and water. Thus, we face an irresolvable dilemma. Atmosphere with oxygen, no amino acids, no life possible. Atmosphere without oxygen, no ozone, no life possible. Furthermore, according to American biochemist Duane Gish, the author of Origin of Life, the existence of an atmosphere without oxygen is theoretical and does not rely on physical evidence. To the contrary, there is geological evidence for the existence of an oxidizing atmosphere as far back as can be determined. Among these are the oxidation of ferrous iron in early rocks and the distribution of minerals in early sedimentary rocks, the precipitation of limestone or calcium carbonate in great quantities. Precipitation is any liquid or frozen water that forms in the atmosphere and falls back to the Earth. It comes in many forms like rain, sleet, and snow. Some limestones are formed by direct chemical precipitation from marine and other waters saturated with calcium carbonate. Stalactites and stalagmites form in caves as water evaporates from calcium carbonate-rich water that drip from the roof of the cave and onto the floor. The oxygen isotope composition is by far the most widely reported climate proxy, i.e. preserved physical characteristics in stalactites and stalagmites. So, what is the solution to this chicken or egg first kind of problem? Until today, the answer is not concluded yet. Question number 2. Could amino acids self-form in the ocean? To assemble large macromolecules necessary for life, there must be a ready supply of basic organic molecules. In a primitive ocean, there must be tons of sugars, amino acids, purines, pyrimidines, etc. In my earlier video, I have explained the experiment of chemists Harold C. Urey and Stanley Miller, who had successfully created amino acids. Allow me to share it again here. In 1953, these two American chemists set out to test the early Earth-free oxygen atmosphere hypothesis. They reproduced the early atmosphere of Earth by creating a carefully controlled, closed system. The ocean was a warm flask of water. As water vapor rose from the water and collected in another chamber, Urey and Miller introduced hydrogen, methane, and ammonia to simulate the oxygen-free atmosphere. Then they discharged sparks representing lightning into the mixture of gases. Finally, a condenser cooled the gases into a liquid they collected for analysis. After a week, Urey and Miller had astonishing results. Organic compounds were abundant in the cooled liquid. Most notably, Miller found several amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, which themselves are the key ingredients of both cellular structures and cellular enzymes responsible for important chemical reactions. Urey and Miller concluded that organic molecules could form in an oxygen-free atmosphere and that the simplest of living things might not be far behind. However, when we apply their experiment in the real ocean, there are a number of severe obstacles that must be overcome. A. The first problem is overcoming the diluting effect of a vast primordial ocean. For example, a study which assumed use of the entire atmospheric supply of nitrogen for the molecular formation indicates insufficient concentrations would result. B. For chemical bonds to form, there need to be an external source of energy. Unfortunately, the same energy that creates the bonds is much more likely to destroy them. In the Urey-Miller experiment, a cold trap is used to selectively isolate the reaction products. Without this, there would be no products. This poses a challenge to simplistic early Earth schemes where lightning simply strikes a primitive ocean. Where is the trap in such an ocean? Also, the creation of amino acids by a chemist in a laboratory is still much different from forming self-replicating life. C. Another problem is that different molecules will react with one another. For example, amino acids and sugars combine and destroy each other. In lab experiments, the component chemicals are neatly separated from one another. How is this possible in an ocean? Question number 3. How did protein and nucleic acid assemble themselves? Any plausible theory of the origin of life must include the formation of complicated macromolecules like proteins, DNA, etc. In addition, there are other necessary components of life such as lipids, carbohydrates, hormones, enzymes, etc. that must be formed and be utilized to produce life. The synthesis of proteins from DNA is very complicated. See any biological textbook. And up to now, there is not a single successful experiment to produce life in a test tube. There is a series of obstacles to the notion of life arising spontaneously from a sea of chemicals. A. Some of the necessary component chemicals react with one another in counterproductive ways. For example, phosphoric acid, which would be necessary to form DNA, would form an insoluble salt with calcium, calcium phosphate, sink to the bottom of a primordial sea, and be unavailable to make DNA. B. How are the polymers or chemical combination of molecules formed in proteins and nucleic acids? A basic problem is that monomers, i.e. a molecule mostly organic, never become polymers unless energy is supplied. They don't spontaneously arise. Protein formation in the laboratory requires a number of deliberate steps by a chemist. Experiments with catalyst and heating of dry amino acids have not demonstrated anything close to realistic live macromolecules. C. Assuming there was a large supply of molecular building blocks, how do we get the specific sequences necessary in proteins and in DNA? Consider proteins. The sequence of amino acids determines the way the molecule will fold up, which gives its physical properties. For a particular function, an exact sequence is required. What are the odds of this occurring by accident? The odds of forming a specific molecule with 100 amino acids is 1/20 ** 100 equals to 10e to the power of the 130, a number 10 with 130 zeros following to it to 1. Allow me to explain this using a very simple example in simple language. Even if there were all the ingredients to bake a cake in the kitchen, there is no way a cake would self-create itself even when the oven is suddenly switched on. Along these lines, the famous astronomers Sir Fred Hoyle and Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe calculated the probability of life forming by chance in the 4.6 billion years on Earth. The answer is 10e to the power of the 40,000 to 1, a number so close to zero as to effectively be zero. Then they considered the universe with 100 billion galaxies, each with 100 billion stars and 20 billion years. Still no chance. Hoyle said, "The probability of life evolving anywhere in the universe is as likely as a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and assembling a Boeing 747. Question number 4. How did living cells assemble themselves? To go beyond proteins and DNA and to assemble them into a working biological system is another mystery. We must go from disjointed molecules to complex interrelated systems that are capable of self-maintenance and self-replication. A biological system is more than a collection of molecules thrown together. These blobs have to be able to do something. They have to act like little machines with input and output related to some greater purpose in the cell. How could then a biological system arise? Now we cross the line from the molecular to the living. Whether bacteria, animals, plants, or people, we all have cells. Cells consist of many biological elements that are enclosed in a cell membrane that allows certain molecules to pass out of it and let others in. It must be able to perform many functions, self-replicate, maintain itself by the construction of new proteins, regulate its functions, etc. Cells are tremendously complex and more complicated than any machine man has ever built. Even the smallest bacterial cell has 100 proteins, DNA, and contains 100 billion atoms. Professor of Biology Michael Denton, in his book entitled Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, explains this complexity with an example. To grasp the reality of life as it has been revealed by molecular biology, we must magnify a cell 1,000 million times until it is 20 kilometers, circa 12.5 miles in diameter, and resembles a giant airship large enough to cover a great city like London or New York. What we would then see would be an object of unparalleled complexity and adaptive design. On the surface of the cell, we would see millions of openings like portholes of a vast spaceship, opening and closing to allow a continual stream of materials to flow in and out. If we were able to enter one of these openings, we would find ourselves in a world of supreme technology and bewildering complexity. A complexity beyond our own creative capacities. A reality which is the very antithesis of chance, which excels in every sense anything produced by the intelligence of man. The simplest cells are not more primitive than or ancestral of larger ones. This poses an immediate problem. How did we get all the complicated machinery to work at the same time? It either all works or nothing works. So far, not a single experiment or observation has proven that inanimate or non-living materials can come together to form life. The only scientific fact that we have for now is life can only be generated from life. Each living cell is formed by the replication of another cell. Thus, the question of how the early cells came into being is still a mystery. In my next video, I'm going to share with you some information that I have gathered in explaining why the validity of the theory of evolution is questionable. Although I have read many books and articles concerning this matter, I found the explanation in Darwinism Refuted by author Adnan Oktar is the clearest, especially because of his extensive collections of evolutionist scientist quotations. Therefore, I will be using the information from his work as the main source of information for my next few videos. For now, I'm ending this video. Thank you for watching and hope to see you next week.